the Panovich Rav loved Jews. He had an Ahavas Yisrael, a love of Jews that was indescribable. Tisha B'Av, we mourn the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. We also mourn the killing of, at this point, we could say countless Jews. We have, of course, the 6 million of the Holocaust that we mourn on Tisha B'Av. But there were millions, Korban Beitar, as the Gemara describes, the destructions of all the Batei Mikdashos, the Crusades, the blood-soaked history of the Jewish people, all the destruction and all of the tsar, all of the anguish. A lot of Tisha B'Av is crying about people, not just about the Beis HaMikdash. The first Kina, Shavasuru Meni, number 6, the first one in the booklet, we'll say later, doesn't speak so much about the Beis HaMikdash. Speaks a lot more about the Jewish people, the suffering of the Jewish people. Ironically, its opening line, Shavasuru Meni, move away from me. Suru Tame Kiru Lamai. Karulamai, they move away from me, I'm Tame. Distancing. It's not a joke. People stayed away. They kept their distance from us. We speak about Geula as Kaptseinu, Yachad, Me'ar, Bakantes, Oretz, gather us in from the 4 corners of the earth. And the Jewish people were despicable and they were unapproachable. Right? We went, right? In our little winter here, our little year, we went from 100,000 people gathered in one place and celebrating, to not having a minyan, not being able to hear. We have a couple people here in the room so that I'm not, talking into the other, and everybody's far away from each other with our faces covered. Shavasuru Meni. A lot of suffering. When Moshe Rabbeinu saw HaKadosh Baruch Hu, when the Zakanim saw HaKadosh Baruch Hu at Har Sinai, Tachas Raglav Kemase Livnas HaSapir. Beneath his feet, there was what appeared as a sapphire brick. Rashi writes what Chazal say, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu kept that brick in front of him from the Shibud Mitzrayim. He was remembering the Jewish people who were toiling, slaving away at brickwork. And Hashem never for a moment looked away from the suffering, from the pain of the Jewish people. When Kol Yisrael suffers, the Gemara says, Shechina Maya Emeres, what does the Shechina say? Kilani me Reishi, Kilani me Zroi. My head is killing. My arm is killing. When we're suffering, He's suffering. Hashem shares our pain. And we always have to ask ourselves if we join HaKadosh Baruch Hu in sharing in the pain of others. Moshe Rabbeinu was the person who took the Jewish people out of Mitzrayim because he walked out of the palace, out of his safe haven, and he went to see what the Jewish people were experiencing. Right? Nasan Eina V'Liba Eliyos Meitzer Aleim. Put his eyes and his heart to see what they were going through. And the next thing you know, HaKadosh Baruch Hu puts his eyes and his heart. Rashi uses the same words to Bayar, Bayeda, Laikim, Nasan Eina V'Liba, Nasan Eina V'Lehelim, Nasan Halayim Liba, V'Lehelim Einav. Put his eyes and his heart. The empathy of the Jewish people, the empathy with the Jewish people, to move to action happens when the Jewish people start feeling for each other. I would point out to you 2 things. Just, it's too delicious Torah maybe to say on Tisha B'Av. Too delicious a Torah to say on Tisha B'Av, but it's a Torah of the Beis HaMikdash. And that is, so we say, the Beis HaMikdash, we mentioned it before, Beis Hadayim Raglav. The Beis HaMikdash is called the footstool of Hashem. Hashamayim kisi v'oretz hadayim raglai. The heavens is my throne and the earth is my footstool. But where on the earth is Hashem's footstool? So what do we say? We said it this morning, say it every day in davening. Uplift Hashem, bow down to his holy mountain. Uplift Hashem, bow down to his footstool. The Beis Hamikdash is the footstool of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And what's the footstool of HaKadosh Baruch Hu? When they saw the footstool of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, what was it? It was the sapphire brick, reminding HaKadosh Baruch Hu of the troubles, the trials and tribulations, the brickwork of the Jewish people in Mitzrayim. The Beis Hamikdash is Hashem's home down here. Now, one could say, when the Rabbi doesn't need a home down here, he's got plenty of place. But if he's down here, then he can know what we're feeling. He's a little bit more close to us. We can come and whisper in his ear. No long distance charges. Right? Hashem comes down. I want to see what's going on. Hadayim Raglav, his footstool, is where he feels what the Jewish people are going through. That's the brick. And you know what Shlomo HaMelech said about the Beis HaMikdash? It's the place where Hashem says, Eini v'libi sham kol hayamim. My eye and my heart is there all of the days. It's the same eye and heart of compassion. The Beis HaMikdash is built of compassion. Certainly the second Beis HaMikdash was destroyed because of lack of compassion. Because people didn't care. Because they hated each other. They spited each other. Because when somebody was embarrassed and humiliated, people kept eating their dinner and they didn't stand up and do something about it. Because nobody cared. If we don't notice the pain and the destruction of people, the people are going through. Now, if we're lucky enough that our job is intact or our business is intact, if we're lucky enough that, in our world of social distancing, we have other family members in the same room, in the same house, in the same building. We're not sitting alone. But we're fine. The Beis Hamikdash is going to be built from caring. The bricks are going to be the bricks of empathy, the eyes and the heart of empathy. And when we mourn on Tisha B'Av, we have to think about all the suffering of people. Millions, then, and the millions now. So I want to tell you a famous speech of the Ahavas. It's unbelievable. Fantastic. You see, the Ahavas, I started to say before, but I couldn't finish. So we'll try again. The Ahavas had many things which haunted him. One of the things which haunted him was he traveled all the time from Ahavas. As we said, I mentioned you before. I mean, he visited South Africa. He had a legendary relationship with South African Jewry, very significant relationship with South African Jewry. He traveled there before Eretz Yisrael. There is a big community of Lithuanian expatriates in South Africa. The community in South Africa is a very Litvish community. And he traveled there. Traveled there to help build his institutions. And more. We'll talk about it later. But he left all the time. When he left on Motzei Shabbos, the 28th of Adar, to go as a shliach, as the emissary of the Lithuanian government, to try to find refuge, the city of Ahavas accompanied. The kids came to the train station. The kids in his yeshiva ketana, the kids in his orphanage, they came to see him off. It was his last trip from Ahavas. They didn't know, but they knew. And the Ahavas would repeat, he said, they all came to see me off, and I was getting on the train. One of the kids, he was very attached to children, one of the kids said, Rebbe, nem mir mit, take me with you. And it became a chorus, take us with you, take us with you. The world was collapsing, and he was going to take them with him, but he couldn't take them with him. He said it, rung in his ears. One of the big tasks of the Ahavas that he did was he created homes for child survivors of the Holocaust. Yisrael, orphans. He did it already for the orphans of the First World War. He did it in Eretz Yisrael for the children, survivors of the Second World War. It was a big issue. Big conflicts that maybe we'll touch upon slightly later that surrounded this. But he was there out in front. You would have thought he's a Rav or a Yeshiva. He dedicated himself to the building of Torah. He was absolutely committed to Jews. He loved Jews. He loved the children. He loved the children in the Batei Ahavas. He loved the children who grew up today are, great people. I remember when the Panavish Rav would go on his frequent trips from Eretz Yisrael, he would come to them, he would lean over them, give them a kiss. I'm going to be away for a couple of weeks. Say goodbye to each of the children. He was a Rosh Yeshiva already. He had hundreds of people, but he knew his role. He knew what he meant. Panavish Rav got up as this was still early. This was in 42, I think, 43. He recovered from his illness, and they were what were known as Yaldei Tehran. What were known as Yaldei Tehran. Yaldei Tehran means the children of Tehran. What does it mean, the children of Tehran? So there were Polish children. There were 700 Polish children who escaped Europe through Trans-Siberia, etc. They ended up in, one of their stops was in Tehran, and many of them came from there to Eretz Yisrael, and they needed homes. They were children without parents, most of them, and they came to Eretz Yisrael. So he created a home for them, and he was busy preparing a home for them. And Shabbos, he prepared. They were supposed to come to him literally Motzei Shabbos. He was going to get them from the transit camps. And he had prepared, and he didn't have linens. He asked if he could give a drasha in the main shul in Bnei Brak, wherever it was, on Shabbos. And they did, and he was an amazing speaker. Everyone came. And the Panavish Rav said the following drasha. He said, we have a parsha of Eved Ivri, of the Hebrew slave, the Jewish slave. The Jewish slave, in the beginning of Parshas Mishpatim, right after the Torah is given, it says he works for you 6 years, the seventh year goes free. But let's say he says, I like it here. So he doesn't want to leave. So then there's a procedure for him staying longer. So Chazal say, it's good for him with you. If you have a Jewish slave, he eats with you and he drinks with you. If you're having prime rib, he's having prime rib. If you're having whatever it is, a great wine, he's having the great wine. If you have a feather pillow, he should have a feather pillow. But if you only have one feather pillow, he gets the feather pillow. You have only one nice mattress, he gets the mattress. Ask the Panavish Rav, I don't understand. We have a rule in the Torah. And the Torah says that even though you're supposed to love your fellow man like yourself, but your life comes first. Right? The two people traveling in the desert, your life comes first. So if that's the case, one bottle of water, your life comes first. So if that's the case, why over here, if you have one pillow, why do you have to give it to the slave? Why is it different? Said the Panavish Rav. Of course your life comes first. But the Torah knows what this master would be like. What's going to happen? There's a nice, beautiful feather pillow. And that night he's going to go to sleep. And he fluffs his pillow and he lies down. And he's going to stop for a second. He's going to say, well, 1 second, my Eved, Chaim, what's he sleeping on? Only I should have a feather pillow? He shouldn't have a feather pillow. What he's sleeping on? He's sleeping on some little a little piece of cloth. Doesn't feel right. And he tosses and turns. He can't sleep. He gets up and he knocks on Chayav's door and he gives him the feather pillow. He says, when the Torah says give it to him, it's because the Torah says you have to take care of yourself first. And you won't be able to manage. You, with a Jewish heart, you won't be able to manage if you know you have a pillow and he doesn't have a pillow. So you give it to him first. That was what the Ahavas Rav said. He said, Rabbi Isai, today I'm going to be getting Yisrael, orphans who are coming from the Holocaust. They have no parents, they have no home. And I have the privilege, I set up something for them you all know. They're going to have a home with us. Right? And he never called it a Beis Yisrael. He never called it an orphanage. He called it Batei Avot, the house of fathers. Because we have to be their fathers. This is the home which we're creating for them as the parents of this community. He says, I have Rachmanas on you. Because I got beds, but I don't have proper blankets. I don't have proper pillows. I know you're not going to be able to sleep tonight. With your pillows and blankets, if you know that these kids aren't going to be there and they're not going to have it. Motzei Shabbos, right after Shabbos, people start coming. He had enough pillows and blankets for the eventual population of the Batei Avot. Maybe they're still using them. He moved people because of his passion that he couldn't rest. The Ahavas Rav was once giving a drasha. I've told the story to some of you before. It's a horrible story and a wonderful story. It's the tragedy is expressed in the story. He was once giving a drasha, I think it was in 1945. And in the middle of the drasha, he cried out. It was his son's bar mitzvah that day. His son, in Panovich, who he thought was still alive, it was 1945. He thought he was still alive. They'd been killed relatively quickly after he had set up poured the foundations of the base medrash in Tammuz of 1941. They were all slaughtered. And he said today would be his bar mitzvah. Today is his bar mitzvah. And he cried, and he went on in his drasha. And people came over to him afterwards. And they wanted to comfort him. And he said, I have my child, but there's so many other children. He refused to allow himself to get caught up in his own thing, in his own issues, his own things alone. Rav Yisrael Meir Lau, tells the story when he came to Panovich as a Talmud to be examined, for admission to the yeshiva. And he got a faher from whomever, and then he said, I want you to go to meet the Panovich Rav. He went to Panovich Rav and he said, what's your name? He said, my name is Yisrael Meir Lau. He said, where are you from? He says, from Pietrikov. Panovich Rav said, you related to the Rav of Pietrikov? And he said, yeah, he was my father. He said, the Panovich Rav just took him in his arms, just hugged him, remembered him. They were both leaders in Klal Yisrael, together many times. But it wasn't just him. Every child was tucked in. I want to mention here, when we finish this kinnis part of the program, I'm going to project, hopefully it'll work through the Zoom, 2 short films, which are very beautifully done. Hashgacha Pratis, at lunch with a man named Ruben Fauman in Yerushalayim, last trip to Eretz Yisrael 7, 8 months ago. And he mentioned to me that he worked on a film about the Panovich Rav. So he sent it to me. And there's one film about the Ahavas, about this project of these orphanages, or whatever we're going to call them. He didn't like that term. The care that he had for each person. He cared for Jewish lives. Nemt mir mit. Rabbi Wein tells an incredible story, beautiful story. It might even be on that film. I don't remember. Just a beautiful, beautiful story. The Panovich Rav later years spent a lot of time in Florida because there were a lot of Jews who traveled to Florida for many months, and it was a place where he was able to work a lot for the yeshiva. And Rabbi Wein was a rabbi in Miami Beach, and at Israel, Miami Beach, and he, as a result, developed a very close relationship with the Panovich Rav. The Panovich Rav said, Rabbi Wein, one day he said, "I want you to make for me a parlor meeting. I want you to invite to your house all the young families in your shul, from between 20 years old and 40 years old. I want all of them to come to your house for a parlor meeting." So Rabbi Wein said, Rav, it's not worth it. They're not the ones who have money. You want the older people, the young families, they don't have any money. Panovich Rav said, "I'm asking you to make the meeting." And he said he was not a demanding person. He never asked him to make a parlor meeting at all. Like, what's going on? So fine. Panovich Rav asked him, so he and his wife made a parlor meeting. They prepared food. All the young couples came from 20 to 40. Panovich Rav got up to speak. The Rabbi Wein introduced him, told him who he was, gave him a proper introduction. Rabbi Panovich Rav gets up to speak. He says, "1.5 million children were slaughtered in the Holocaust. There are 1.5 million souls of those children are floating around in this world. They're looking for a home. You need to create the next generation of Jews. You need to have children." He didn't ask them for a penny. He asked them to have children, to replenish the ranks of Klal Yisrael. Ahavas Yisrael. Everyone knows it. Everyone who met the Panovich Rav. That's why they get all misty-eyed. That's what they remember. The incredible love that he had for Jews of every kind. Hillel Zeidman, who was a writer involved in many, many things from before the war, during the war, post the war. Hillel Zeidman remembers hearing the Panovich Rav speak before the war. And remember how he spoke about that for Klal Yisrael, as we say in Sim Shalom, we don't just have chesed, we have Ahavas chesed. Jews love to do kindness. We have a love of kindness, not a mandate to do kindness, but a love of kindness. I mean, it was so apparent, his caring and his love of kindness. He came by it honestly. The Panovich Rav himself used to say that his mother, when they didn't have wayfarers, poor people at the table, his mother would say to herself under breath, "Ay, such a sad, empty table. Nobody to share with. Such a sad, empty table, nobody to share with." His grandmother would have travelers who would come traveling on the dirt roads of those towns and villages, and they would prefer to go to sleep in the main room next to the furnace so they could warm their cold bones. They would fall asleep whatever time she would take their clothes, which were muddy and wet. She would spend half the night washing the clothes and then setting them out to dry so they would have clean clothes for them in the morning, these travelers. Panovich Rav considered it a big part of the Litvisha personality, a disdain for selfishness. He wanted to to do for others. There was a story that he told that he was very happy that he heard it from one of the Litvaks that he knew in South Africa, who told him that his father woke him up in the middle of the night and said, "Excuse me, but could you give your bed? There's a guest, there's a traveler that just came through." And the person said to his father, he says, "Well, what am I going to sleep on?" His father had his hammer, and he was knocking up the hinge pin from the door of his bedroom, and he took off the door and he laid it down. He laid it down on the ground, so he could sleep on the door. He wouldn't be sleeping on the floor, he would sleep on the door. He says, "Really, I should sleep on the door?" So he says, "Yes." He says, "You know, you're going to have a bed tomorrow night, and you had a bed last night. This fellow is traveling to, I don't know what he slept on last night, I don't know what he's going to sleep on tomorrow night." The Panavish Rav loved that story. He loved that story. It spoke of the simplicity of chesed. What made him have Ahavas Yisrael? Maybe he got it from his mother. Maybe he got it from his grandmother. Maybe he got it because he was a Litvak. I have to tell you the amazing story that the Panavish Rav would say, something which he attributed it to. It's an astounding story with a spectacular postscript. The astounding story is that the Panavish Rav, and I've told you as always when we do these things, a fraction of the story of the Panavish Rav. But he spent 3 years learning in Rabbi by the Chafetz Chaim. He was already an accomplished Talmid Chacham. He had learned for years and tells after he left home to go to learn with a better Malabed when he was 10 years old. He was bar mitzvah away from home. He left home when he was 10 years old. He entered Telz very, very young because he impressed Rav Shimon Shkop, who came to the town where he was to give a shir. And he was in Telz for many years. And then he went for a short period of time to the Navardik Yeshiva, to the town of Navardik, and to the Navardik Yeshiva, maybe 6 months. And then he went to learn by the Chafetz Chaim. And when you picture the Panavish Rav, the Chafetz Chaim, it's not like two peas in a pod, right? The Chafetz Chaim was we have him as a very austere, serious tzaddik. The Panavish Rav was a personality that filled the room. Panavish Rav spent 3 years. He considered the Chafetz Chaim his Rabbi, and whatever he did, he always wanted to think, what would the Chafetz Chaim have said, what the Chafetz Chaim would do. He came to Rabbi, and he came to the house of the Chafetz Chaim. And he came to the house of the Chafetz Chaim, and he came in, and the wife of the Chafetz Chaim said, "Okay, you can come in, wait here." And he comes in and he sits and he waits in the simple room of the Chafetz Chaim, and he hears someone wailing, crying like crazy, and it's going on a little bit. And he's sitting there at a certain time, like responsibility. He goes over to the Rebbitzin and he says, "Is everything okay?" And she says, "Yeah, no, that's the Rav, that's the Chafetz Chaim. There's a woman in the community who's going through a difficult childbirth, and her husband came to ask the Chafetz Chaim to daven, so he's davening for her." Panavish Rav said that when he heard that this Rav is davening like this for a person, and he's wailing and crying, at that moment he decided that he's giving himself over to the Chafetz Chaim, that the Chafetz Chaim is going to be his teacher and his mentor. That's the best story. That helps you understand where this empathy, where this care, where this love of Jews come from. The spectacular postscript, it's almost not worth saying it because it takes away from the human miracle here, is that the Panavish Rav said this story in the Beis Medrash HaGadol on the Lower East Side in Manhattan when he was there. Once he spoke and he said this story. And a fellow came over to him after the speech. He said, "Did that happen in 1908? And the Panavish Rav said, "Yes." He said, "That was me. That was me." He says, I knew when I grew up, I knew my parents told me that my mother had a very dangerous childbirth. My father went to the Chafetz Chaim during the childbirth, and the Chafetz Chaim davened very hard, and as a result, I was born. Go figure. At another time, in the same area, the Panovich Rav gave it Russia, and he told this story. And someone else came over to him. And this person was one of many, many, many hundreds of Jews who were in this category. Jews who had come from Europe, who had a rich, rich background, and now were in a very different context. And were very different. Now, some of them were, turned to resent Loyalenu, to hate the world of faith. But some of them didn't. They had good feelings that they would sometimes go to rekindle. And this person who wasn't from, at this point in time, who was an activist in the labor unions, which were, socialist hotbeds of, many, many Jewish people who had turned away from their faith. But he heard that the Panovich Rav was speaking there, and he came and he listened. And he came over to the Panovich Rav afterwards, and he said that he, as a young man, went to Rabbi to learn by the Chafetz Chaim. He was a very young man. And he came to Rabbi, and he didn't know where he was going. He arrives by train in the middle of the night, and he walks in the city, and he sees a dim light coming from one house. He knocks on the door, and the person answers the door. He says, "Can I help you?" He says, "Yes, I came to try to find Yeshiva Rabbi, the Chafetz Chaim." The person said, "Just rest here, and Yetz Hashem in the morning. In the morning, I'll help you find it." And he went to sleep. He says he remembers he went to sleep. The person put him to sleep next to the stove, gave him something to eat, put him to sleep next to the stove. And he remembers as he was sleeping, the person took his coat and wrapped his feet, his legs in his coat so he would be warm. It was the Chafetz Chaim. He came to the house of the Chafetz Chaim. Chafetz Chaim's light was on in the middle of the night. He was learning Torah. He says, I've traveled a long way, but my feet are still warm from what the Chafetz Chaim did for me. To feel for others. There's a story in the Gemara. Second pasuk, second verse in Megillas Eicha. How it sits alone, the city that had so many, that was teeming with a large population, and now it's Kalmana, now it's alone, widowed. Right? Then it says, Bochai sifke balayla, cry, she shall cry at night, v'dimasa alechya, and her tears stain her cheeks. So the Medrash says, and the Gemara as well, similar thing. Lama balayla, why at night? Because sound travels much more at night. Rabbi Abel said, Laila Moshe chimakina. At night, people more readily lament. Ma'isa b'isha achas, there was a story with a woman that lived in the neighborhood of Rabbi Gamliel. And she had a ben tishchayres. She had a young, strapping son. Umeis. And Le'aleinu, he died. V'yisabeichal balayla. And at night, she would cry herself to sleep. But Rabbi Gamliel shemeas kayla. Rabbi Gamliel, the neighbor, heard her crying. V'yaniskar churban beis hamikdash. He remembered the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, and he wept with her. Until his eyelashes fell out. He was weeping so much. Bochai, Sivke, Bocha, Umevaka Acherim. They cry and they get others to cry along with, to stimulate others to cry. And there are those who hear that, there are those who get it. I'll tell you a beautiful thing from a big heart. When the Panovich Rav first visited Eretz Yisrael in 1935, he came to Kevarochel. He was a Kohen. His name was Kahanaman. He was a Kohen. And he had the Ahavas Yisrael of a Kohen. Ahavas Habriyos of Aaron Kohen. He came to He came to Kever Rachel and he couldn't go inside, but he stood outside. And he said he stood there to daven and he heard inside a woman davening and she was crying, Mama, Mama, Mother, Mother, as you can hear at Kever Rachel Ad Hayom Hazeh. But he heard it, never heard it before. And he was very moved. And he said, now I understand the pasuk. Kol barama nishma, v'hidachi samrumim, Rachel mevaka al baneha. It doesn't say Rachel bocha al baneha. She's crying. It says mevaka, which implies that she brings others to tears. It says, you see, people go back to the Mama Rachel, they go back to the mother, and they're moved to tears. She doesn't just cry. She touches the emotions of others and gets others to cry. But not everybody cries. It needs the right heart to cry. Not everybody, like Rabbi Gamliel, would have taken the tears of this woman, joined her in crying, and cried over the Beis Hamikdash, cried over the fact that there's so much pain in the world because the world isn't right, because the world isn't fixed. But one of his Rav said, you can't put your head down on the pillow. If the Eved doesn't have a pillow, how could you? You won't be able to sleep. Have Rahmanas on you. You won't be able to sleep. That's an Ahavas Yisrael. That's a love of the Jewish people. That's care. That's Einav V'liba V'yos Meitzar Aleim. He was completely enraptured with it. I want to end with a thought. I've shared it with some of you before. I think it's something which is essential for Churban Habayis, and I think it's something which is essential for us now. I made a conscious decision not to spend all of Tisha B'Av speaking to you about coronavirus. I think we have our fill, but a few moments to focus on what we're going through is extremely appropriate and important. I want to share with you a chazal that's in the Gemara that says as follows, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu cries every day, 3 times a day. 3 times a day he cries over the fact that his children are in Golos. And the Gemara says, it says a story about Rabbi Yossi, who entered one of the churvais, one of the abandoned buildings, destroyed buildings of Yerushalayim, to daven. He heard HaKadosh Baruch Hu crying. And the Gemara says that Eliyahu Hanavi came to him and said to him, you know, it's not only them, but whenever Jews get up in their Batei Knesios and Batei Midrashos, in their shuls and their Batei Medrash, and they answer, Yehei Shmai HaGadol Mevorach, Yehei Shmai Rabba Mevorach, may Hashem's name be blessed, Olam Lo Me'almayim. Hashem shakes his head and he says, Ashrei, fortunate, is the one who is praised in his house in this way. Woe to the child who had to leave his father's house, and woe to the father who had to send the children away from his table. When Klal Yisrael comes together in a shul, and we do what we're supposed to do, we say that our biggest wish in the world is that Hashem's name should be known, should be sanctified. Yiskada Shmei Rabba. The name of Hashem should be great. The name of Hashem should be uplifted. In a world that he created, Kira Usei, according to his will, he created with something in mind. May it be living up to what it's mind. May the name of Hashem be blessed. And we want it, and we want it. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, that's the stuff that the Beis Hamikdash is made of. That's when Hashem cries. He says, you know, it's a blip. I wish they were with me. I wish they were around my table. Oh, that I had to send them away. Oh, for them that they have to be away. That's what Hashem remembers. Every time there's a glorious thing, when we come together and we do something glorious to be Mekadesh Shem Shamayim, to sanctify Hashem's name in the world, it makes Hashem say, oh, this could be always. This could be Beis Hamikdash. We could be together creating the great Kiddush Hashem of the Mikdash. Woe to the father who had to send away, doesn't have his children at his table. Woe to the children who can't be at their father's table. You know, we're supposed to have empathy to each other. We also have empathy for the Rabbi. We speak about Shchinta, the Galusa. The Shechina is in exile. Misameach Tzion b'voneha. Blessed is Hashem, who will bring joy to Tzion with its children. Hashem misses us as we miss him. But we get the metaphor now, I think, better than before. Families were not able to be together for a long time. To some degree still. To a significant degree still. You know? I, like many, just separate. I'm not, Baruch Hashem, I don't complain at all. But you know, family members who would see each other, who would be together, don't have it the same. So Baruch Hashem, I don't go to sleep alone in my house. You know, we have people there, but there's separation. There's tremendous separation, tremendous anguish, tremendous pain. People who aren't able to be with each other. People who are alone. Can we relate now a little bit more to the tsar of the Shechina? Can we focus more on the tsar, on the anguish of those people? Many, many people who, because of this pandemic, Golu me'al shulchan aviyim, and they left their parents' table. Their children, the parents don't have the children around their table. The Shechina cries. How can we be comforted? You know who the Mashiach is? David HaMelech, right? The descendant of Mashiach, Ben David. Okay. Why? What did David HaMelech say? Imetein shenos leinai lafapais numa. If I'll give my eyes sleep or slumber, imela al eretz yitzuai, will I go on my bed? Ad emsa mokaim laHashem mishkanei slavir Yaakov, until I find a place for Hashem, a resting place for the strong one of Yaakov. Hine anechi yoshev beveis arozim. David HaMelech said, I live in a palace made out of cedar wood, and Hashem's Oron, Hashem's ark, is in a tent, in a temporary dwelling. David HaMelech was sensitive. He couldn't sleep at night because Hashem didn't have a proper resting place in the world. So we have the Pun of Israel, and we have David HaMelech. We have the person who shouldn't be able to sleep at night because either their servant or the orphan from the Holocaust doesn't have a pillow under their head. We have the Rabbi who feels bad that his children aren't around his table. There's so many people who don't have their children visiting them or with them, their parents with them. And the Rabbi, this is us. There's one common denominator to all of this. And that is to have a big heart and open eyes and realize that it's not just me. It's not just me. And the Beis HaMikdash will be rebuilt when we have lofty thoughts about the pain of the Shechina. Lofty mystical thoughts, maybe. I don't know. I think David HaMelech's thoughts were much more grounded. I think the real ones which will rebuild the Beis HaMikdash is when people start thinking about what other people are going through. There aren't lofty mystical thoughts. They're just plain human sensitivity thoughts. And Hillel taught the person who came to convert, I'll teach you the Torah on one foot if you insist. And what is it? What you don't like, don't do to somebody else. Asks Rashi, That takes care of the Bein Adam L'Chaveirei. That takes care of the interpersonal mitzvahs. What about the religious stuff? What about the first luach? What about the first tablet? Says Rashi, Reyacha v'reya avicha al tazev. There's a pasuk that says the Rabban Shem is your best friend. Just treat the Rabban Shem like you would treat a friend. He's been a good friend. He's been a pretty loyal friend to us for a while. Just treat him like you would treat a friend. V'ahavta l'reacha kamecha is the rule for the whole Torah. There's to be people with hearts, with Ahavas Yisrael, with love of others, with love of the Jewish people. We will